What terrified you as a kid that isn't scary now? Story 1. Catching fire. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to get set on fire at all, but the amount of stop, drop, and roll lessons I got in kindergarten made me think this was going to be a once-a-year thing at minimum. Story 2. My bedroom as a kid was a den converted into a bedroom laundry room, and one wall was covered in a black mirror with gold paint flecks, very 70s. But at night, the shadows combined with the dark glass and paint made me imagine faces, figures, etc. It really scared me, and I would line up my stuffed animals along my bed to protect me. Story 3. A straight row of fully grown trees. Grew up in the desert. Trees were around but not packed densely and were mostly Palo Verde trees or palm trees. But there was a row of trees that looked like what I consider most would imagine typical trees look like. And that one row of trees was also in close proximity to a large prison. My brother told me that's where Mr. Boogedy lived and where the escaped murderers would hide when they'd break out of prison. Oh yeah, did I mention we had a guy break out of prison and take down the town librarian when I was a kid? So, yeah, tree lines. Edited to add, in my haste last night, I did not go and fact-check my childhood memories. I had conflated escaped inmates and the librarian takedown into the same story. It's not. What I was confused about was the memory of my dad picking me up on my walk home from school. Normally, I would walk past the library because he knew that the search for the murderer of the librarian was ongoing. And there were a few times we locked down the school, and the rumor mill was that there was a prisoner escape. I have no idea on how I could verify that or not, although there have been prisoners that have taken correctional officers as hostages and a librarian at the prison as a hostage in attempts to escape. Story 4. Thunderstorms. I used to hide under the covers and could only run from the room between flashes. Now I will sit at the window and watch. I love a good thunderstorm now. All it took was a very weird 9-ish-year-old me to stand at the window during a big storm and yell things like, "Is that all you've got?" Yeah, kinda like Lieutenant Dan, but before I ever saw Forrest Gump. Story 5. Looking at mirrors in the night. Thought they would become haunted in the dark. Edit. Thank you, guys. Really needed it. Didn't know this would be such a relatable thing. I did think it was a really unique, weird type of fear. Edit 2. That my fear was based on an optical illusion, as presented in some of the replies that pointed to this video, which explains it. Story 6. Thistles and cacti. Basically, any plant that had nasty spikes. Whenever I'd walk in a grass field and see a tiny thistle plant near my foot, I would stop dead in my tracks and call for help. Nowadays, I still get uneased at the thought of falling onto those things, especially the giant thistles. Story 7. As a kid, I was somehow able to watch the first 2 Jurassic Park movies so much that I knew the script off by heart by age 5, but an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine scared the shoot out of me. This was about the time the show started to move away from adapting Audrey's stories and started writing their own scripts. As part of this, they decided to make a bunch of spooky episodes. I was fine with all of them, except one about a big boulder. From memory, the gist of the story is they open a new quarry right at the spot. A gigantic boulder sits on top of a cliff. One of the engines, Rusty, disliked the place because it feels as if the boulder's watching him. Eventually, they destabilize the cliff enough that the boulder drops onto the tracks, and you have a series of Indiana Jones-style chases. So, what exactly was so scary about it? Simple, really. The boulder had a face. Now I know you're wondering, but don't all the trains have faces? Yeah, but their faces are distinct from the rest of them, to the point you can tell they're meant to have faces. The thing with the boulder is that it didn't consistently have a face. It only has a face at a couple of points in the episode that randomly appears. So it's a normal rock, and then bam, it's a rock with a very angry face. I think it was the inconsistency of whether the rock was sentient or not that freaked young me out. After confessing this to a friend as an adult, I ended up finding the episode on YouTube and just laughing at how ridiculous it was being scared of it. The greatest irony of all, I went from being terrified of a rock to getting a degree in geology. Story 8. Gorillas. That SpongeBob episode as a kid scarred me. I would have to close my eyes once that part came on, and my brother had to tell me when it was over. My uncle, knowing I was scared of it, told me killer gorillas lived in the dark part of the basement, so every time I went down there for something, I'd sprint full speed back up the stairs. Answer: my son was scared of gorillas as a little guy. We had watched that one Donald Duck cartoon with the escaped gorilla, and every night we had the same conversation. Mom, where do gorillas live? The jungle. Is that near us? No. Can a gorilla get here? He'd have to cross an ocean, and gorillas can't swim, and I'm 90 sure they can't row a boat. Then they'll have to cross a bunch of busy freeways, and gorillas are too scared of trucks to even try. You're safe, kid. Okay. Night, Mom. Night, boy. Story 9. Nothing. Everything is 1,000,000 times scarier now than it was when I was a kid. Edit. Thanks for the awards, folks. Glad to see I'm not the only one who thinks being a grown-up is scarier than we could have possibly imagined. Story 10. E.T. I swore he lived in my bedroom closet. I watched the movie with my cousins on Thanksgiving when I was little, and to this day I've never watched the whole thing. It doesn't terrify me anymore, but I just don't have any desire to watch it. Story 11. This one is completely random. The song One Way or Another scared me so badly as a child. I would cover my ears when it played. My big sister worked at the skating rink and would do double-duty babysitting me while she worked. They played that song exactly one time while we were there. I freaked out. It was dark in there and the song was loud and coming from everywhere. They had this little coin-operated cartoon booth, sort of like a photo booth. Get in, draw the curtain. But instead of a camera, there is a television. You put in a quarter and it plays a random cartoon. I hid in there, scream crying and kicking anyone who tried to check on me with roller skate-clad feet. They turned the music off completely so that my sister could get me out of the booth. My sister made sure that they never played it while I was there again. Another time we were watching The Muppet Show and there was a pretty blonde woman hosting. Then this meanie starts singing One Way with a bunch of fudge monsters. I jumped up and ran to my room and hid in my closet. I couldn't trust my favorite TV shows anymore either. I have no idea why I was so afraid of that song, but it genuinely terrified me. I like it fine now. Story 12. Balloons. Specifically, balloons popping. When I was really young, my dad popped one near my face as a joke, but it really traumatized me. I dislike going to birthday parties because there were always games where you had to pop a balloon in some form. Answer: I still can't stand balloons popping, and I'm 30 now. I've never liked sudden loud sounds that make me jump. I'm okay with planned fireworks like the ones at Disneyland and 4th of July firework events planned by my city because they're expected and on schedule. My grandparents live near Disneyland, and when I used to come over all the time at 9 p.m., you could see the Disney fireworks from her balcony. And even though they're loud, you know when to expect them so you can prepare and put in earplugs before they go off. But balloon popping are unpredictable, and you can't even expect them. Story 13. Fantasia Mickey. Pretty sure it was a nightmare that started it, but I was terrified of him for several years. My sisters then thought it was funny to hide a little figurine of him in my room and move it around at random to scare me even more. Story 14. The FBI warnings on VHS tapes. For some reason, I connected that with the infomercials for random junk you could call and buy that would say our agents are standing by, thinking that FBI agents were standing outside my house to make sure I didn't sell copies of the tapes that I owned and use the money to buy Time Life cassette collections and crappy kitchen gadgets. Story 15. The living spaghetti that crawls around Swedish chef's kitchen as he bangs it with his frying pan used to freak me the fudge out as a kid. Pretty sure my mum just informally banned Muppets from our household because she got tired of me screaming and crying and hiding behind the couch whenever that creepy sketty came on screen. Story 16. Probably not the only person in the thread to say this, but being home alone used to scare me. It didn't always, and sometimes I was okay with it, but there were times when I was home alone at 11 or 12 that I would suddenly get this creeping and gradually intensifying sense of dread that something evil was in the house with me, keeping out of sight. It got especially bad if it was getting dark outside. I was really scared of starting to hear things, like something walking around in another room, or a faucet turning on, so I would keep music blasting over the stereo to drown out any hallucinatory sounds. Most of the time I wasn't too scared, but there were a few times when I was borderline terrified. And the thing is, there was nothing actually scary about our house. It wasn't haunted, none of us ever noticed anything creepy or out of the ordinary, and I never had any paranormal or spooky experiences as a child. It's just that being home alone would set my imagination running. To this day, in my mid-30s, I sometimes have nightmares about being a kid again in our empty house, with only my sister with me. In those dreams, we're usually waiting for our parents to get back. As the sun sets, the house gets gradually darker, and a sense of fear starts to settle over us. Even at 34, those dreams still scare the shoot out of me when I wake up from them. But fortunately, being at my house alone doesn't. Story 17. Oh man, I was so afraid of the fire alarm and fire drills at my school, I begged my parents to switch me to a different school, and they said that every school does fire drills, so I was shoot out of luck, basically. I had nightmares about it. Story 18. Honestly, I can relate so much. My grandpa now has Parkinson's and his vocal cords can't move as much, so it's extremely hard to understand what he wants to say. Conversations don't come as easy for him now, so he mostly listens. I wish I wasn't so intimidated as kid. Story 19. Probably a result of the metal cooling down after a day in the sun. Edit. How is this my most upvoted comment on Reddit? Also an expiation for those asking. I was assuming a metal axle witch would expand from heat during the day, preventing rotation. Then at night, when it cools and shrinks again, the release of tension cause it to spin. Story 20. I visited an old mill once. It was closed to the public except during special events only a few times a year. The place was huge and had full living quarters attached. The place was really run down, holes in the walls. If you weren't careful, you could easily fall through the floor into the river that powered the mill. Of all the old places I visited, this one absolutely looked the most creepy and haunted. The tour guide was also the lead workman on refurbishing the place, and he lived in the mill in the quarters. It was just me and my wife doing the tour alone with this guy, and he is telling us not just about the mill, but also about rebuilding it and living there. Eventually, he turns to ghost stories. He starts telling us all about the noises and voices and banging he hears basically every night. He tells us about the can of cremated remains of a past caretaker's wife that they just found tossed in a pile of garbage. The way he told the stories is what haunts me more than the place ever could. He didn't tell these stories like they were fun tales. He explained them so matter-of-factly and with such a tone of resignation to his voice. He clearly had just accepted that the building was horribly haunted, and all he could do was try his best to ignore it every night. The look in his eyes was one of pleading, like he desperately wanted my wife and I to help him escape from this hell he lived in. Story 21. When I was 13, my parents let me paint my room lime green. I painted myself, snuck out, and stood outside my friend's window to scare her. Almost gave her dad a heart attack. I wasn't even allowed to finish my room. It's still half green. Story 22. My sister and I were all excited to watch Hocus Pocus on Disney in like '99. Before the movie, something came on and we ran to our mom in terror. My dad from the other room asked what it was. My mom, annoyed, yelled it's F-kin thriller. Story 23. When I was a teenager, I was home alone a lot, so when it would storm, I'd run over to the neighbors. However, they never let anyone in their house, so he'd stand outside in the storm with me, so I wasn't alone. Stay in a house where I'm dry alone or stand out in it. Yeah, I wasn't the smartest kid sometimes. Answer. This is a real question, not meant to be snarky or anything. Do you know why your neighbors wouldn't let anyone in? Was it a germ thing or a privacy thing? My older sister, 6 years older than me, was always terrified to be home alone, and even at the age of 22, when we were out at sporting events or whatever, if a storm rolled through, she heard a sound, or if it was just a Tuesday, she would run over to the neighbor's house. She's, thankfully, much better now at 42, but it took a while and many times for me to sleep over with her and her kids if her husband was on midnights. I was the total opposite, being the youngest of 4 kids, surrounded by people and sounds all day. I couldn't get enough of the quiet. I'm grateful the neighbors let her in because I'm not sure she would have survived. At least your neighbor hung with you. It's always nice to not feel alone when you're scared or upset. Story 24. I did the reverse. I didn't mind storms as a kid, thought they were kinda cool. Then when I was 20, I got caught in a flood and developed some PTSD. I'm mostly better now, but I still don't like thunderstorms. They make me anxious. I usually draw my curtains and put on some white noise. Story 25. Whenever I got lost in a store or couldn't find any of my friends at school, I would think to myself, this is it. They've all been raptured, and I've been left behind. Seeing that movie as a kid really messed me up. Story 26. It always bums me out when I hear that Jesus is used as the boogeyman for so many. I'm deeply religious, but I understand how that view turns people off of Christianity. Guilt and fear aren't supposed to be weapons, but things Jesus frees us from. Story 27. I was similar, but I was scared of doors. Just doors. The big windy things looked like a mouth, and the lock looked like an eye. I'm still waiting to be in a dark alleyway, and then seeing a door come at me on all fours. Story 28. When I was quite young, I saw a brief clip on TV of what I assume now was a comedy show. The clip saw an old lady go into one of those standalone pay public toilets that have an automatic door. She flushes, but the door won't open, and the thing floods. She eventually escapes soaking wet. I was scared of those types of public toilet for years. Story 29. Holy shoot, same. My fear of flushing the toilet, however, came from an experience I had at a friend's house when I was about 7. Apparently, the basement toilet wasn't hooked up properly. They had issues with their sewage. I, being 7 years old and semi-responsible, went to the bathroom, flushed, washed my hands, and came back out to rejoin my friend. Her dad came downstairs freaking out. He was swearing, asking who flushed the darn toilet, yelling at us, etc. as water started to come up through the drain in the concrete floor. Even now, in my late 20s, I still sometimes hesitate to flush a knee. Unfamiliar toilet on the off chance I might trigger a flood. Story 30. That movie kept me up at night, but not for the reasons you think. So the monster has a vanity plate. It reads, "Beat new," or "Be eaten you." It's a plate about eating people, so it's more likely that the plate is his than it is stolen. So the monster filed forms into the DMV to get them. But not only that, but the monster needed to register the car and have a driver's license, so on and so on. I've lost many hours of sleep thinking about this. Story 31. I sleep with my feet hanging out of the bed and half woke up one morning, and it felt like someone was massaging my feet. It was bliss. I don't know if it was some form of sleep paralysis or a ghost or what, as I didn't look because I didn't want it to stop. Lovely way to start the day. Story 32. There is this creepy crawl space behind our furnace in the basement, which is right next to our washer and dryer. The furnace air ducts block most of it from view when doing laundry, but a quarter of it is still about 10 feet to your left. It's like an evil black hole where your worst nightmare is hidden, just staring at you and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The worst. I'm always afraid something is going to crawl out and follow me up the steps. Story 33. We had the most terrifying basement when I was a kid. Creepy farm tools, cobwebs, one light that you could only turn on directly from the light itself in the middle of the dark room. So the trip was creepy in and out. Story 34. Our old house had a concrete basement with multiple rooms and very few functioning lights. It was terrifying. In the back of the basement, there was a tunnel that led underground to a store that was downhill from the house. The store was long abandoned, which made it worse. When we first moved in, I always made sure the door was shut to the tunnel and blocked with a cinder block to offer some peace of mind. One day I went down to get pellets for the heating stove, and the tunnel door was wide open and cinder block was moved. I was the only one in the house for weeks. I boarded the door shut with 204s that day, but we still stored the heating pellets down there. Whenever I went down to get a bag, I freaking ran back upstairs, but always felt like someone was hiding down there and following me back up. My husband was in the military, so I was always home alone, which made it even worse. I'm still scared of basement stairs. Story 35. Sodor, from the older episodes, is pure nightmare fuel. My kid was really into Thomas just before it became less dystopian. One birthday, I found myself buying him the official Thomas collapsing bridge and couldn't believe it. 10 years later, my kids will still drag out all those old tracks and accessories and go to town building complex layouts. So I definitely got my money's worth. Story 36. I was sucked into an escalator for that exact reason. I was also terrified of strangers and was pulled out by a giant man whom I did not know. My parents didn't notice at first because they were too busy arguing, "Aw, vacation." Story 37. OMG Rescue 911. Why my mom let me watch that as like a 5-year-old, I'll never know. But I was obsessed with that show. I was terrified to run with a toothbrush because some kid fell on the show and it went through the roof of his mouth or stabbed his throat. Some crazy shoot, LOL. Story 38. I'm a projectionist at a movie theater, and when we did speaker tests every week, it was a clip by THX that we would play, and at the end it would do the signature sound, and I fudge loved it every time it rumbled the entire theater. Story 39. My son was scared of gorillas as a little guy. We had watched that one Donald Duck cartoon with the escaped gorilla, and every night we had the same conversation. "Mom, where do gorillas live?" "The jungle." Is that near us? No. Can a gorilla get here? He'd have to cross an ocean, and gorillas can't swim, and I'm 90 sure they can't row a boat. Then they'll have to cross a bunch of busy freeways, and gorillas are too scared of trucks to even try. You're safe, kid. Okay. Night, Mom. Night, boy. Story 40. My husband's cousin saw a black man for the first time whilst in a store. He was maybe 6 to 8 yo. He yelled, "Look, Mom, a Michael Jackson," at the top of his lungs. Not Michael Jackson. A Michael Jackson. We still tease him about it. His mom was, of course, mortified. The area was not very diverse in the 80s. Story 41. I don't remember how old I was, probably 4 or 5, but I remember the first time I met a black guy, I interrupted the conversation he and my dad were having to ask him, "What happened to your skin?" I remember after a moment of bewilderment, he chuckled and said, "I got sunburned, really badly. Wear your sunscreen." Story 42. Okay, I'm a Canadian raised on small military bases, and my mom, I were talking about this the other day. I wasn't raised in a lot of diversity, but I have no memory of my first black person and going, "BOTF?" Like, were you raised in rural Sweden or something? Story 43. That's some straight-up Stephen King vibes. I can picture the dark skating ring, maybe some disco lights, sound coming from everywhere, feeling panicked and chased. Then when life gets back to normal, the song starts popping up in unexpected places, like it's haunting you. Story 44. Holy shoot! I'm glad I'm not the only one. That movie gave me nightmares for weeks, man. And just the trailer for Willard with those fudge rats showing up eating people. Both of those movies were the kinds of nightmare that you wake up from, and then they stay there waiting on your jerk. Story 45. I still can't stand balloons popping, and I'm 30 now. I've never liked sudden loud sounds that make me jump. I'm okay with planned fireworks like the ones at Disneyland and 4th of July, firework events planned by my city because they're expected and on schedule. My grandparents live near Disneyland, and when I used to come over all the time at 9 p.m., you could see the Disney fireworks from her balcony. And even though they're loud, you know when to expect them, so you can prepare and put in earplugs before they go off. But balloon popping are unpredictable, and you can't even expect them.